The video started like any other soft jazz in the background, warm lighting and a proud mother in pearls raising a glass of champagne. "To Jonah," she said, voice quivering with carefully composed grief. "He lost his way, but he was our boy. And this place is how we'll remember him, with love, with forgiveness." The camera panned up to a glowing wooden sign, Jonah's Table. The video was under a minute. It had over 2 million views. And Jonah Elridge watched it in silence, sitting in his one-bedroom apartment in Portland with a spoonful of cold soup paused midair. He hadn't heard that name in years, not because it wasn't his, but because he'd buried it. Or more accurately, it had been buried for him. At 19, Jonah came out to his family. What followed wasn't silence. It was violence, a split lip, a shattered nose. His father's boot kicking open his bedroom door. His mother crying into a Bible saying the devil had stolen her son. In the hospital, they wrote "fell downstairs." The truth never made it to the police, or the church, or the family Christmas newsletter. His parents told neighbors he had run away, disappeared, possibly dead. They whispered with just enough sadness to seem concerned. They transferred his savings to his younger brother, erased his presence from family albums, and when extended families asked, they simply said Jonah had chosen a different life, and it didn't end well. That was over a decade ago. And now they had opened a restaurant, not just any restaurant, a high-end bistro in the heart of their sleepy hometown, done up in reclaimed wood and linen napkins with his name in embossed gold on the menu. Jonah's Table, a place for healing and family. Healing for whom the betrayal was not in the name. It was in the lie baked into every brick of that building, the lie that he was gone, that he had failed, that their cruelty had somehow become a noble grief they hadn't called. Not once they hadn't asked if he was okay, if he was alive, but they had copyrighted his name, trademarked a logo with a boy holding a cookbook, and even written a mission statement, inspired by a son lost too soon to the confusion of modern times. Jonah's stomach turned. He searched the restaurant's website. There it was, a founder's statement from his parents, a photo of his mother smiling tearfully in front of the kitchen pass, a quote that made his breath hitch. "We forgave him, and we hope others will find the courage to do the same for their children." Forgave him. They had taken everything, his youth, his safety, his name. Now they had resurrected him, but not as himself. They had turned his life into a parable, a cautionary tale, a marketing tool. Jonah closed the laptop, his hands shaking. This wasn't grief, this was theft, dressed up in a suit and tie with white napkins and moral superiority. They were serving lies and the whole town was eating. He could have ignored it, could have walked away, as he had done so many times before, from the pain, the humiliation, the longing to be seen. But something in him refused, not anymore. Not when the people who had broken him were now profiting off the pieces. Not when the world thought he was dead, and the only version of Jonah left was the one they had rewritten. If they wanted to serve a story at Jonah's Table, he'd give them one they couldn't digest, but he wouldn't show up empty-handed. Hard Stories tells the stories others tried to bury. If you've ever been silenced or declared dead with lies, let us speak for you. Subscribe to follow Jonah's journey and stories like his. Jonah didn't sleep that night. The image of his mother raising a toast beneath the soft glowing sign of Jonah's Table clung to him like cigarette smoke, pungent, fabricated, and impossible to scrub out. But it wasn't until he stumbled onto the scholarship fund that something inside him finally cracked. It had been shared through a local high school's Facebook page. We're proud to announce the Jonah Elridge Memorial Scholarship, awarded to young men who embody strength, discipline, and traditional family values, in honor of a son lost too soon who made mistakes but found redemption in the arms of God. Jonah stared at the post, blinking slowly as if rereading it would somehow shift the words into sanity, but they stayed the same. Traditional family values, made mistakes, redemption. And the fine print, it was worse. The application required an essay about moral integrity and disqualified any student with a criminal record, behavioral incidents, or who identified as LGBTQ+. Jonah felt the blood drain from his face. His death, or the fiction of it, had been turned into a screening tool. His name was now a filter, a gate, a way to reward obedience and punish difference. His life story had been sanitized, weaponized, and offered as a cash prize for kids who'd never dare be who he was. He found the foundation's website. His parents were listed as directors, while his younger brother Caleb was named community coordinator. There were photos of him smiling with scholarship recipients, Boys in pressed shirts, pinned crosses, military haircuts, but not one of them looked like Jonah. He clicked play on a short video. It opened with soft piano music and the voice of his mother. "Our Jonah made mistakes. We wish we could have saved him before it was too late. But now through this scholarship, his name can help guide other boys down the right path." The video faded into a slideshow of a blonde boy at age 10, then 12, then 17, surrounded by family, smiling. It was Jonah. His face, his childhood, but not his truth. It ended with a quote attributed to him, a quote he never said about regret, sin, and the grace of family, forgiveness. He slammed the laptop shut. This wasn't grief, it was a eulogy to a lie. They hadn't just erased who he was, they'd invented a Jonah who repented, who died ashamed, who confirmed every belief that had led to his beating, his exile, and the lost decade of silence that followed. They had created a ghost and dressed him up in virtue. And that ghost was being awarded with applause scholarships in local news interviews. Jonah opened a private folder on his computer. Inside were scanned copies of the hospital report from when he was 19. Broken nose, fractured rib, multiple contusions. The attending physician had marked it accidental trauma. But Jonah still remembered the sound of his father's belt cracking against the kitchen wall when he tried to run. He had never gone public, never wanted revenge. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about reclaiming a story that was being sold to others. Reclaiming his name, his face, his truth. They thought he would stay quiet because he always had, but grief can't be sold. And identity isn't theirs to trademark. Jonah started making calls. The first was to Avery, a filmmaker friend from culinary school who now produced short documentaries for queer youth advocacy groups. Avery didn't hesitate. The second was to Elias, an attorney he knew from the Portland LGBTQ+ Center, where Jonah had once worked nights helping homeless teens find shelter. And the third, it was to a local journalist in his hometown, a queer woman fired from the same church press. Jonah's father once volunteered for him simply for posting a pride photo. She answered on the second ring, and when Jonah told her what his parents had done, she didn't ask for permission. She asked for the date of the scholarship gala. Jonah had always believed in food as a form of healing, but now he believed in fire too. Not the kind that destroyed, but the kind that revealed he wasn't coming back alone. And this time it wouldn't be through the back door. It was the 7th night of the grand opening, a Saturday. The evening air was thick with spring pollen, and soft jazz drifted from inside Jonah's table, where white linen tablecloths shimmered under amber lights, and the waiters wore pins shaped like tiny doves. The night's theme, as printed on elegant gold-embossed menus, was An Angel's Journey, remembering Jonah Elridge. Jonah stood across the street in the shadow of a parked SUV, watching families file inside dressed in navy blazers and pastel dresses. He hadn't been back to this town since he was 19. The bakery he once saved up to buy a birthday cake from was now a vape shop. The high school that suspended him for causing a disruption after a student kissed him in the hallway had a new roof but the same iron gate. Nothing and everything had changed. He adjusted the collar of his charcoal blazer. Inside it, tucked carefully in the breast pocket, was a sealed folder. Medical records, photographs, one notarized affidavit. He didn't intend to use words tonight. He intended to use facts. As the final guests took their seats, the lights inside dimmed. A projector hummed, and a soft female voice began narrating. Once there was a boy named Jonah. Jonah took a breath, crossed the street, and opened the door. The voice inside the video continued as he stepped into the dining hall. A professionally animated film played on the wall, gentle colors, Halo's white light. It told the story of a pure-hearted boy who was led astray by modern influences, lost his way through temptation, and found eternal peace through family forgiveness and divine mercy. Jonah's legs didn't shake, his heart didn't race, because something deeper had taken over. Not rage, not grief, precision. As the animation faded into a freeze frame of a cartoon, Jonah ascending into clouds, his mother stood on the small stage, her hand clutched a microphone. Her voice trembled. "Even when our children break our hearts," she said, "we must leave the door open for redemption. I forgive my son for choosing the wrong path, and I pray he has found peace." Jonah stepped forward, calm and clear, and walked toward the microphone. There was a pause in the room. Not immediate shock, but that creeping unease when a familiar ghost walks through the door. A few people whispered. One woman gasped audibly. His mother blinked once, twice, and then froze. "Excuse me," Jonah said into the microphone. "May I speak?" Silence spread like ink through water. Jonah reached into his pocket and unfolded the hospital records, holding them up toward the projection light. The back wall caught them in full view. Radiographs, medical reports in the name of the physician who had treated a then-teenage Jonah for a broken rib and nasal fracture diagnosis, blunt force trauma. He spoke not loud, not angry, just enough. I was 19 when I was beaten unconscious in my own home. His eyes swept the crowd. That was the night I came out. My father called it discipline. My mother called it God's test. Then they took my phone, drained my bank account, and told the world I ran away. He turned toward the projector. They call that forgiveness now. They call that redemption. No one moved. Even the servers had stopped mid-step, trays trembling. Jonah placed the papers on the podium. I didn't die. I survived. I was never lost. I was removed, scrubbed, deleted because I refused to lie about who I am. He reached for the second folder. Inside screenshots of the scholarship funds application forms where LGBTQ plus identification was listed under disqualifying criteria. Your scholarship, he said, voice steadier how, is built on a dead man's name. But I am not dead. I am standing right here. There were gasps. One man stood up, then another. In the corner, his brother Caleb stood stone still, hands balled into fists, but not in anger, in shame. I have no interest in revenge, Jonah said, but I will not be your symbol of sorrow while you punish others for living like me. Then he did the one thing no one expected. He pulled out his wallet, took out a card, walked to a server at the side, handed it to her, and said loud enough for the room to hear, I'd like to cover tonight's dinner for everyone. There were murmurs, confusion, then stunned silence. He turned back one last time. Let the final meal in my name be paid for in truth. And he walked out. His mother collapsed before the applause could start. The first article hit the internet within 20 minutes. Dead gay son returns to family's restaurant opening with receipts. The video of Jonah speaking hit 6 figures by midnight. By morning, a national outlet had picked up the story, but Jonah didn't read the comments that night. He was busy booking a pop-up dinner for the following week. Across the street, a table for those who never had one. By Sunday morning, Jonah's face was everywhere. Across TikTok stitches, Twitter threads, and the front page of the Oregonian captured mid-sentence beneath the headline, he was their ghost, now he's their reckoning. But while the media buzzed with outrage and applause, Jonah's response was measured. He declined interviews from morning shows, turned down 2 documentary offers. He wasn't interested in celebrity. He was interested in correction. Correction, not destruction. He sat with Avery and Elias in a sunlit Portland cafe, the kind where the baristas knew your name, but not your story. In front of them, a stack of paperwork, a list of legal clauses, and a press draft titled, The Statement That Should Have Come From Them. Jonah didn't want the restaurant shut down. He didn't want to bankrupt his family. That would have been easy and empty. He wanted 3 things. First, the removal of his name from all branding, signage menus, and the scholarship fund. His name was not theirs to license. Second, a public apology to be posted on all official channels and submitted to local media. Not a spin, not a vague nod to recent events, but a real admission. One that acknowledged the violence, the lies, and the exclusion. Third, all profits from the restaurant's opening week, which had surged due to the viral spotlight, to be donated to the Portland LGBTQ+ Youth Alliance, the organization that had once provided Jonah a bed, a therapist, and a reason to wake up. The list was short, but its weight was not. Initially, the family resisted. His father, who had been suspiciously absent during the memorial dinner, released a tepid statement through a lawyer claiming miscommunication and family misunderstandings, followed by a veiled threat of defamation countersuit. His mother, meanwhile, had locked down her social media accounts. The scholarship's Instagram page quietly archived all posts with Jonah's image. And the restaurant, it issued a single-sentence press release. Jonah's table will be closed temporarily due to unforeseen circumstances. But then came the pressure. The town's local paper ran an op-ed titled, When Silence Becomes Theft. A viral TikTok called out the hypocrisy of Christian forgiveness being used as a cloak for exclusion. Even former scholarship applicants began speaking up. One admitted he'd felt wrong applying after realizing it excluded openly queer students. Under mounting scrutiny, and with Elias now threatening formal legal action armed with medical documents, Financial transfers and digital records of the scholarship's discriminatory terms. The family folded. The statement Jonah had written, word for word, was posted on every platform affiliated with the restaurant and scholarship fund. It read, "We, the Elridge family, acknowledge that we caused harm to Jonah Elridge, our son, brother, and fellow human being. We misrepresented his life, erased his identity, and attempted to rebuild our image on the foundation of his silence. We offer no excuses. Only truth. Jonah is not dead, and we no longer deserve to speak on his behalf." The next day, workers were seen taking down the gold letters from the restaurant's entrance. The scholarship website redirected to a blank page with a single line, "Reevaluating our values." Jonah didn't attend the press conference. He didn't want the camera flash. He spent the day instead at the Portland LGBTQ+ Youth Alliance, dropping off a check with the total profits from the opening week, $46,722.28. It was delivered in full. No conditions. A volunteer, a soft-spoken teen with chipped black nail polish, stared at him for a long moment and whispered, "You're the guy who came back from the dead, right?" Jonah smiled. "I was never gone. They just pretended I was." That evening, he went to the street where Jonah's table once glowed. The sign was gone, the windows covered in butcher paper. But across the street, a new banner fluttered in the breeze. "No one's forgotten at this table." Jonah's pop-up dinner wasn't fancy. There were folding chairs, homemade sourdough, mismatched plates, and candle jars from thrift stores. But every seat was full. The guests were many queer teens, trans elders, ex-pastors, runaways, one formerly homeless chef, people who had been cut out of family dinners, left off guest lists, or declared lost causes. On each seat sat a handwritten note folded neatly like a napkin. It read, "They didn't want us at their table, so we built our own." Jonah didn't make a speech. He served risotto. He refilled water. He laughed when someone spilled red wine on a plastic tablecloth. And when the meal ended, he stood silently in the center of that humble pop-up and raised a toast to those still standing. Even after being erased, the applause wasn't thunderous. It was quiet, like church, like healing. 3 weeks after the storm, the town began to forget. The restaurant remained closed, in its signless exterior fading into the background like an abandoned stage set after the final act. Gossip had moved on. The news cycle turned elsewhere. Most locals said nothing aloud, but in the corners of grocery stores and Sunday pews, people whispered, "He didn't look like someone who forgives." Or worse, "He should have stayed gone." But Jonah hadn't come for closure from them. He came to close something inside himself. He returned once more to the town, but this time not for confrontation, not for media, for dinner. He called it the final table. A one-night dinner, no press, no signs, no live streams, just invitations, carefully chosen, hand-delivered. Each invitation was written in the same font used on the original Jonah's table menu. But the cover was different. A blank white page with only 3 words in gray ink, "You were invited." Guests included a handful of faces from his past. Mrs. Delaney, the middle school teacher who once slipped him a pride pin in secret. Amir, the boy from his first ever kiss behind the gym, who never spoke to him again. A counselor from the Portland shelter, now retired. And yes, even Caleb, his younger brother, who replied with just 3 words, "I'll be there." The venue was a small, borrowed space behind a bookstore, just enough room for 20 chairs, 1 long wooden table, and Jonah's carefully prepared courses, each dish holding a part of his journey, a soup he once survived on in the shelter, a roasted eggplant dish from his first solo kitchen job, and for dessert, the lemon tart his grandmother used to make before the silence swept her too. There was no speech, no apology demanded. Jonah greeted each guest personally, served them with quiet kindness, and sat at the head of the table with no title. Not the dead son, not the ghost, not the survivor. Just a man with hands calloused from kitchens and a heart that had finally grown into its own silence. Midway through the meal, Caleb stood. His voice was thin but steady. "You didn't ask me to speak," he said, "but I have to. I knew what they did to you. I didn't stop it. I didn't help. I let them turn you into a lie so they wouldn't turn on me next." He looked down. "I'm not here for your forgiveness. I'm here because I couldn't let this be our ending." Jonah didn't reply with words. He simply gestured to the empty chair beside him. Caleb sat. The rest of the night passed in warmth. Strangers connected. Laughter found its way between courses, and Jonah, for the first time in years, felt what so many had tried to sell in his name, peace, but not the kind that requires forgetting. After dessert, Jonah rose, this time with something to say. Closure isn't a door slamming shut, he began. It's a quiet decision to stop waiting for an apology that may never come, to make space where there was none, to stop asking why they erased you, and start asking, and what will you do with your name now that you have it back? He walked to the corner of the room where a small envelope sat on a pedestal. Inside it, a letter addressed to his parents. Never mailed, never read, it ended with a single line. You don't get to decide if I'm worthy of being remembered, I do. Jonah burned the letter that night, not in anger, but in finality. The ashes scattered outside the venue door, small gray truths left behind like seasoning in the wind. He didn't forgive, but he ended it, not with fire, with food, with presence, with proof that he was never what they claimed. He had always been more. And now, finally enough, have you ever been erased from a story that was rightfully yours? If you could write the final chapter, what would you say, and who would you invite to your table? Heart Stories gives voice to the erased, the rewritten, and the misnamed. If someone ever told your story for you and got it wrong, subscribe now. We're here to help you take it back.